In this activity, we'll be utilizing testing to ensure that our code runs properly. Once you're ready, open up Visual Studio Code and we'll get started. Once Visual Studio Code loads, open up your activities directory. We are on activity 22, so double click on A22. Once the activity file loads, review the topic and program requirements. Attempt to implement a solution on your own with the video paused. Once completed, resume the video and I will demonstrate my implementation as well as provide insights to the activity topic. Alright, let's get started. This activity topic is on testing. The requirements are to write tests for the existing program to ensure proper functionality. Our notes indicate that we need to create at least 2 test cases for each function. We can use the cargo test command to test the program, and there's an additional note stating that we have bugs in the program that need to be fixed. We should read the documentation comments for each function to determine how they should operate when they're operating correctly. The first thing I'm going to do is split the view so we can see our test code and our program code side by side. Next, I'm going to create a test module, and I'll include the macro to designate it as a test module. The CFG is setting configuration, and we're just saying that we're in the test configuration, and the test configuration means we will only compile this when we're testing code. Next, we need to make sure that we're using all of the functionality within our tests. So we can use crate with the asterisk to bring all of the functionality into the module. So we'll have clamp, div, concat. Main is also available, but we won't be using that. So these will all be available within our test code. I'll start with the clamp function. As we can see from the description, it ensures that n is greater than or equal to the lower value and also less than or equal to the upper value. So it just ensures that it's between these two numbers, and we know that we have the equals there too, so it can include the lower and upper values. We're not going to check the body right now. We know there's bugs because the comments said that there's bugs, but for right now, we'll just try it with some basic input just to make sure our tests are okay. So I'll test for the lower bounds first, so we're going to be testing just the lower portion. I'll create a test function. I'll name it clamp lower. Make sure that we put in the test macro here, and this tells the compiler to run this function as a test. Next, I'll create some variables. The first one will be the results of running this function. So we'll call the clamp function. We'll supply values of 10, 100, and 1000. Since the clamp function ensures that the value n is in between the lower and upper values, when we call clamp, we should get back 100. Since 10 is less than the lower value, it should be set to this lower value. Our expected results is going to be 100. And to make sure that this properly tests it, we need to use assert EQ as a macro. And we're just going to assert that the results is equal to the expected value. And if not, we'll put a message, should be 100. Let's run this test first, just so we can get into the workflow. To run the tests, we go to terminal, new terminal, and then we can just do cargo tests. We are on activity 22. So do --bin A22. And here our clamp lower function works out okay. Our test passed. And so we're looking good. I'm now going to test the upper bounds of the clamp. So if we just copy this function, we can use the same code and just change this to upper. And we're going to change the values as well. So we'll leave the 100 and 1000 here, and we'll just change the end value. So I'll change this to 5000. So 5000 is much larger than the 1000 max. So this 5000 should be changed to 1000 by the function. Our expected result is going to be 1000, and we'll just change our message to should be 1000. I'll run the test again just to make sure we're okay. It looks like lower and upper are working properly. Next, let's check the div function. So this just divides 2 values. I'm just going to name this first test check div, and we're just going to have a result. We'll do 1 divided by 1. Our expected value is 1. This function returns an option, so we have to make sure our expected result is wrapped in an option by using sum. We can then do the assert EQ macro, and we have our results, our expected results, and should be 1. Remember to add the test macro, and if we run the tests, we see that all our tests are passing so far. Lastly, we have the concat function, which takes 2 strings and places them immediately one after another. So I'll write a test for that one as well. So our results is going to be concat. I'll just do letters. So we'll concat A and B together. Our expected results is going to be an owned string. So we have an owned string here. So we need to create one in our expected results. And if we're placing them immediately one after another, as indicated here, it should be AB as our expected result. Finally, I'm going to do an assert EQ and make sure that the results is equal to the expected results. And if not, I'll leave a message. Finally, I'll add the test macro so it gets ran as a test. And now I'll just run the test again and make sure everything's good. So it looks like we have our first test failure. Here we have check concat, and that test failed. And it says our failure reason. The left has an A and a B, but there's a space in between. And we know according to the documentation, they should be immediately next to each other. So we can fix that by hopping into the code. If we take a look at the body of the concat function, we'll see that there is indeed a space there. If we just take out that space, the test should pass without problems. As we can see, the test now passes. There is one more bug in this program. If we take a look at our div function, we see that we have A divided by B. Our check div function only checks for 1 divided by 1. So let's try another one. I'm going to call this check div 0, and we're just going to divide this by 0. Our expected value should be none, and if this fails, we'll put a message. So with division, if you divide by 0, that's an error. Let's see what happens when we run the code. Here we can see that our test failed because we attempted to divide by 0. So there's no code checking in this divide function whether or not we're dividing by 0. So we'll fix that. An easy fix would be to check if b is equal to 0, and if so, just do an early return of none. Otherwise, we're going to do the division operation. This should fix the test, and all our tests should pass. As we can see, we have our check division, which just checks random numbers. And then we have check divide by 0, and now we know that that also works properly. When you're writing tests for code, it's not always obvious what to test and how to create error conditions in order to create a valid test. This is why it's always a good idea to write your tests after you make your functions. So in practice, you would make a function, for example, concat, and then once you feel the function is complete, you can write some tests for it to ensure that it works properly under multiple conditions. This concludes the activity on testing. I'll see you in the next presentation.